going to talk. Really? Is that the old? Yes.
That's the next one after mine.
This is the old printout. It's been changed there.
There we go.
Can you change that to?
I can, yeah.
I'll speak while you're sorting
Do you
that.
want to go, Bruno?
I'm happy to speak or I can start. I've just got a general blurb that I'll say.
Go
Is that
for
all
it.
right, John?
Yep.
Okay,
You guys
so
can go first then.
little change to the schedule. We've got Bruno. Oh,
All right.
you were talking.
Chaotic.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm just going on by the schedule on the internet because the printout was actually an older version with the incorrect times. So it's my real pleasure to welcome Joanne, who's going to be talking about behaviour change. This is such an important issue. She's got 30 years experience in natural resource management and looking at behaviour of how we manage these diseases is such an important aspect because if all this wonderful research, all this wonderful energy from people means nothing unless we can make the public aware of it and make the public behave their changes. I think it was beautifully put by Taha earlier this morning that forest management is really people management. Sorry for that, Bruno.
All right. Can everybody hear me? All right. Thank you. The thumbs up over there, so that's perfect. Yes, my name is Joanne Beckwith. I'm a cognitive psychologist who's worked a lot on a variety of environmental management issues, including a number of years ago, dieback management, done some work in collaboration with the South Coast NRM group, for instance. And what I want to talk about, I should also mention that I'm very much an avid bushwalker as well. So that also is a lens through which I look at the question of behavioral change. And as we've already heard a number of speakers mention, dieback management is in large part about managing the behaviors of people, because it's our activities when we're in these forest and woodland areas that we are transporting the dieback infected soils into new territory and causing the spread of dieback. And unfortunately, our mapping just continues to show that the area of spread is growing larger and larger. So what I want to talk about today is, I could talk about behavioral change for a long time, so I had to sort of pick an area to focus on. And I guess it's a question for you guys to think about. I don't know the answer to this question, but I think it's a question that those of you who are running behavioral change programs for dieback management should be asking yourselves, and that is whether or not our programs are delivering the sorts of results that we would like to see them achieve. Now, there's a lot of good work that's been going on out there. And so we have work by NRM groups, by government agencies, and a variety of other players who over the years have developed a whole lot of different behavioral change programs and tools. And this slide just shows a number of them, things like the Green Card Training Program. I think on day 2, you're actually going to be on some of these sort of behavioral change programs. Hygiene best practice guidelines, industry-specific resources for things like the extraction industries. For recreational users of forest areas, we have signage, we have infrastructure such as boot cleaning stations. I found the previous talk very interesting in that regard. So the question is, how well are these performing? If we look back and just try to simplify what we're trying to achieve with behavioral change, this is a very overly simplistic model of what behavioral change is, very simplistic. So basically we have a problem, we identify the people who could influence the problem if they were to change their behaviors. We try to build up their knowledge as to why this is a problem and what they can do about it, give them information, give them tools to help them do that. We hope that they develop favorable attitudes towards doing the right thing. and that this leads to intentions, and that intentions lead to people actually doing the behavior, doing it correctly, and doing it repeatedly over time. And when you see it up here with the 3 boxes with the nice arrows going between them, it all looks pretty simple. But we all know it's not that simple. Some people will do what we want them to do without much fuss. They'll step up, and other people, you could work with them for a long periods of time before they will adopt the sort of behaviors that you're wanting them to do. And the reasons for that are many. There's a whole wealth of literature on behavioral change, not necessarily all about Dieback, but about a range of different environmental problems and even public health type of research. All of it identifies a suite of factors. These are some of the ones that come up frequently in multiple of the models. One is problem perception. We all see the problem here, but do the people that we're trying to influence their behavior, do they get it? Do they see what we see? Do they at least see a problem that would motivate them to act differently? And I think Dieback is very challenging in this regard. Let's face it, it's a waterborne mold. It's hard to point in the landscape and say, that's it over there. Matter of fact, I've gone out in the field a number of times with experts, and I've said, is that Dieback over there? And then the 2 experts would have, let's call it a robust discussion about whether or not that is in fact Dieback. And then they'd say, we probably need to test that. So if they're having trouble identifying Dieback, can you imagine how difficult it is for the layperson to get their head around it? So the question is, how do we frame these problems in a way that people become receptive to them and feel motivated that, yes, I agree, that's a problem. Yes, I see that my behavior can influence that problem and I want to do something about it. And part of that is wrapped up into the perceptions of the person who is giving them, or the agency that is giving them that message. If it's somebody we trust and we see as credible, then we're more likely to actually take their advice on face value. If we don't trust them, we either, the blinkers go on, the shutters are rolled down, we don't want to hear it. So perceptions of the messenger can either help you get your message across, or if you're not a trusted source, then in fact, it could have the opposite. And of course, some messengers are trusted by some sectors that you're trying to influence, but not by others. It's hard to find somebody that's universally respected by all the different sectors that you're trying to influence. Values. Well, the past year, we've all been living in the middle of a big behavioral change experiment with COVID. And we've seen where people have tried to change people's behaviors, right? Be it mask mandates, going and get vaccinated. And we've seen how important values are. For instance, people who, let's say, have strong libertarian values tend not to be very receptive to government directions that they feel perhaps are intrusive on their individual rights to live the way that they want. For other people, they're very happy to take directions from health authorities and really won't even question that. But we certainly have seen with COVID how important values are, either as enabling or in disabling messaging getting through and having successful behavioral change. Social norms are another one. We're socialized to try to actually conform, to want to do what we think other people think we should do, especially want to conform in terms of doing things that people that we respect do. So today I was coming in and I thought, should I wear a mask or shouldn't I wear a mask? I didn't know this audience very well. I do see some people here, Giles and others, that I recognize, but even with the mask, I can tell it's you. But I didn't, so I came and I looked around and I saw that there were a number of people wearing masks. So that made the decision for me that I also would wear a mask. But so I assessed my behavior and made my behavioral choice based on looking at what was happening in the room. And there were enough people in the room wearing masks that I felt it was appropriate that I would wear a mask. But that's just how I made my decision, okay? Perceived or efficacy. So how people want to know that if you're going to ask them to do something, especially if it's kind of inconvenient, you have to change your behavior, that it's actually making a contribution towards solving the problem. And that's why I found the previous, I should not touch my shirt like that, the previous speaker so interesting, because I think that this is an area we often don't have great evidence. So the more that we can have evidence showing that if you do these behaviors, they will in fact be beneficial, then you know, that's all for the good. We've certainly seen where people have been asked in other environmental realms, and perhaps the most notorious of these is in waste management, where people have been, you know, households have been told to sort their waste so that into recycling streams. And then they subsequently find out that in fact, everything has gone to the landfill and been co-mingled because the local government didn't actually have the capacity to recycle the materials. When people find out about something like that, there's a great loss of trust. Compliance capacity is another tricky one, I think, for Dieback. Where, you know, I've gone out and met with rangers in national parks who are very keen on trying to stop the bad behaviors in these areas. But maybe there are 1 or 2 people covering a vast area. We don't have the capacity to have a lot of eyes on the ground monitoring behaviors. I know, for instance, in national parks, motorized vehicles going off track is a really big problem. If people don't feel that there's any chance that they're going to be caught, that they're not going to be watched, then they're less likely, unfortunately, to comply with what we want them to do. People can often want to do the right thing, but end up, they have good intentions, and then good intentions are the best predictor of behaviors, but they're not a perfect predictor, because between having the intention to do a behavior and actually doing that behavior, you can run into barriers that stop you from doing the behavior. You may not have the right skills. Should I repeat that? You should have the right skills. No, I'm sorry. You may not have the infrastructure to support the behavior. So we talk about people want, you know, clean your car, clean the underside of your car. Well, do you have wash stations around that people could use? No point in asking people to do things if they don't have, there's no capacity for them to be successful and be able to do that. That just frustrates people. We give people messages, like through signage and other things. Are our messages clear enough, or are our messages so complex sometimes that in fact we're hurting our message or hurting our potential that our messages will be understood? Now, these sorts of factors are factors that you can sort of be considering when you're first designing your program or tool, but they can also be considerations that you use when you review your program. And what I find is I can go online and look at the organizations that are doing Dieback management, that are showing wonderful leadership in this area. I can find all of these behavioral change programs and tools, but what I find very hard to find is any analysis showing how successful they are actually being. All right. I would love to see a lot more work in that area. I think if that work is happening on individual cases, I would love to see that information shared more so that others can learn from it. Yes, every situation is unique, but we also have a lot of commonalities. Now, one of the areas, so here's where I'm basically saying we need to be out there and reviewing. Whenever you design a behavioral change program, you put it in, you've gotten your funding, you put it in, and you almost always have like that throwaway line at the end where say, oh, this will be reviewed, and based on the review, we will make adjustments to our programs. Is that really happening? What tends to be, people sort of lose energy. They're very enthusiastic at the front end, and then they get very wrapped into the implementation, and yet the review sort of never really happens, or it doesn't happen in a well-designed fashion. So it's important, though, to know whether or not, maybe we are assuming that a certain proportion of bushwalkers are actually using our boot cleaning stations. Do we know how many are doing it? I mean, how many people think that 90% of bushwalkers make good use of the boot cleaning stations, 90%, 80% of bushwalkers, 70%. Any takers? Got 1, 2, 60%. Another one. Okay, well, there's a couple of different things there, and that's important, is that they're trying to use it, because a separate question is whether or not they are using them, satisfactorily. 50%? Oh, yeah, okay. At least 40%? You are a very pessimistic lot, I have to say. I don't know what the answer to that is, but I wish I did. Because if I was trying to make decisions about whether or not it's good to be investing in more of those stations, I'd like to know the answer to that question. Beyond just knowing whether or not they're doing it, I would want to know if they are doing it, why they're doing it, what are the things that are resonating, why are we being successful? And if they're not doing it, why aren't they doing it? Need to understand that. So, is there a gap between our expectations of our programs and what we're actually achieving? What factors are creating that gap? And then if we've identified what those things are, what can we do about them? Now, sometimes it's very hard to remove a barrier, and you might find, in fact, there's very little you can do to reduce a barrier. But in other cases, you might go, gee, just a small change in our program will allow a lot more people to successfully engage with this behavior, okay? So we want to ask those questions. So we need to monitor, we need to evaluate and adapt. So it's an adaptive management approach, is that what we're talking about? And the benefit is that we can make more informed choices going forward. We can maximize the potential of our programs, but we can also know whether or not these are areas in which we should be continuing to invest, or maybe we need to shift our focus, or maybe we need to use other measures to complement our existing efforts. This is an area that has very limited resources. We have to be smart. We have to make good investment choices. Now, I mentioned earlier that I'm a bushwalker, okay? So I fall into one of the target groups. I'm one of those people that you want to influence my behavior when I'm out walking. And probably between 10 and 15 years ago, they introduced the unified signage. And this is an example here from a trail down in the Denmark area. And this is the sort of sign, some of you recognize, oh, I know that trail. This is the sort of sign that you'll typically see if you go up in the Perth Hills or throughout the Southwest or South Coast. And the signage is put up in special value areas. They indicate the dieback status, access, restrictions, hygiene requirements. It typically tell you, first off, what is dieback? Right? What sort of damage it's doing, and what sort of behaviors briefly we would like people to do. And then at the bottom, it has like that traffic light system that you can see there. And I'll just bring that up in more detail, okay? Traffic light systems are used a lot in behavioral change programs because people know what traffic lights mean, right? We already know that. And so it should be cognitively easy for us to then use that when it's out in the field. But I would say that that's only true if you're using it to mean the same thing people assume it means. What I am finding, and I must admit, when I go out bushwalking, I should be doing it for relaxation, but you know what happens? I'm looking at everybody else's behavior and trying to figure out what they're doing. And I have to say, I have seen too many cases where people have gotten themselves completely twisted around, where they're going and stopping and cleaning their boots before they go into the infested area. And then when they're coming out of the infested area and going into the clean area, they don't clean their boots. And you go like, well, what? How could they get it so wrong? I saw that happen once and I thought, oh, that's an aberration. Then I started seeing it happen more often. What's going on? I think the reason is that people are confusing the description of the status, dieback status of an area with what they're supposed to be doing. So people see green, dieback free. Well, if they think traffic lights, what does green light mean? It means all good, proceed, no danger. They see red light. What's that mean? Stop. There's a hazard, take action, defensive posture. When in fact, what you're saying here, when you see a green, is in fact saying, this is a good area, thus, I want you now to stop and do something to make sure that you don't contaminate this area. That causes a problem because that's not how people think about the traffic light system, okay? And when you do that for people cognitively, all of a sudden, you heard the term cognitive dissonance. Well, this is your classic case of that, okay? So a friend of mine who knew I was going to be talking about this, who also works in environmental management, has a PhD in the subject. They're somebody I go hiking with quite a bit. And they sent me, I got a text on a Saturday afternoon with these 3 photographs. And they said, I'm up in Rolling Stone. I'm hiking up here and I'm so frustrated. I don't understand what they want me to do in terms of behavior. Now these signs are technically correct, okay? Dieback free, dieback infected. But you see it says dieback free and under it says no entry. And then we have another one that says dieback infected. It also says no entry. So people start to go, well, I don't understand. Now they are correct. But you have to remember when people are out walking around, you've got a very short amount of time to get your message through and for people to understand it. This is cognitively very complex for people, okay? Now we want to show you, this is another example from another place. This is an example from New Zealand, okay? And you notice here, unlike us where we tried to explain what Vitaphora cinnamoni is, which they can't see, they just use a picture. Brilliant. So it's very simple and makes the case very effectively saying what we do and what we don't want, and this is why it's important you take action. It also talks very, very simply about it. It spreads by soil movement. Great. We don't need to talk about it's a waterborne mold, blah, blah, blah. Don't need that. And then just gives some very clear direction. So cognitively for somebody, this is a much simpler sorts of directions than the sort of signage that we are using, which as I say, is technically correct. And I know that people have put a huge amount of effort into the development of that signage. So, you know, it pains me a little bit to even flag this. But what I would say is, when it comes time to review your signage, right? You're not saying go out there and change all your signage, then please take into consideration the cognitive complexity, and maybe we can address that in the future. So my final comment just is monitor, evaluate, and adapt, and share your findings with others so that we can all learn as a community. Thank you.
Dr. Joanne Beckwith, thank you so much. That was wonderful. Sorry I couldn't introduce you better
That's
before,
right.
but it's really lovely to have you talk. I feel like kicking myself. You make such a good point, and you delivered that so clearly. Do we have any questions, please?
Yes.
So good. First of all, that was a pleasure to listen to. Thank you. I'm curious about what you mentioned about monitoring being of high importance when it comes to behaviour change projects, or a behaviour change project, which is a training course like the Green Card. How can you? Is there any research on what the most meaningful ways to monitor behaviour change as a result of those kinds
Well,
of?
sometimes it can be very, very simple, like just following up and going like, let's go down your list of people who came to your training, go out, talk to them, find out what they've done. Were they able to implement the things that you thought that they would implement? What pieces of information did they retain over time? Just debriefing them. It can be very straightforward. It doesn't have to be, you know, super complex. There's no replacement from going out and actually talking to the people whose behavior you're trying to change and see how they're going. That's the simplest approach to doing it. Yes,
Cameron.
One of the things you said, one of your messages was that we have a real lack of resources to communicate this. But we're just going to give the wealthy people in this country a tax cut of $240 billion, and And when the new federal minister for the environment spoke at the press club the other day, her first initial bit of funding was about $40 million. So this messaging about resources and being able to apply and run programs that do what you're saying, which is absolutely correct. Like there's a big dissonance around the fact that we don't have resources. We have plenty of resources, but we keep saying this to ourselves and keeping ourselves in this small world.
Yeah.
Appreciate your comments on that.
Well, I agree with you. I'd love to see the problems that we're interested in getting more funding, but I think we also have to, while we're championing that, we also have to be smart with how we use the resources that we do have. That's all I can say.
Lovely to have further discussions. Thank you so much. Sorry about the mix up before, but it's a real pleasure to